Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. This is BRN AM for Friday, July 12th, 2024. And our top story today, we'll be taking a look at the Microschool Movement. And joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Don Soifer is the Chief Executive Officer for the National Microschooling Center. Don, so great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
And I love this, as I was telling you in the quote-unquote quasi-virtual green room, I love this topic. And I want to start off with a basic question. What is a micro school? How would you define that?
Well, terrific. Thanks. So microschools are innovative, small learning environments. Today's microschooling movement has gotten a lot of progress, a lot of attention, a lot of momentum right now. In a lot of ways, though, microschooling is not something terribly new, right? So many of the microschool models that we see around the country resemble the one-room classrooms that we saw dotting the American prairies of the 1880s as slate blackboards moved across on trains. And in some cultures, a whole lot longer than that. But microschools today are often updated with what we now have for technology and what we know about pedagogy. Some of them use technology, some of them don't, but it's an incredibly diversified movement that looks very different in different parts of the country, and it's really, really growing.
And you talked about there's a momentum behind it. What led to the momentum? Clearly, parents want their children educated. I would assume that's like every parent's dream. But what led to this movement growing at such a fast pace?
Well, without a doubt, the momentum really took off during the pandemic circumstances and shutdowns, where what we saw were, millions or certainly hundreds of thousands of American families just came to reevaluate their relationships with the institutions that they'd historically relied upon to meet their family's education needs. And a lot of that was absolutely tied to the circumstances that all of us as parents were in during the pandemic conditions. Now, though, it's really not about pandemic and overall. Now what we see is it's really a broad response to what reasonable families from all sections of society, left, right, center, are just wondering if their present incumbent schooling systems are what's going to best prepare their child for the future that their kid is going to have in the economy that's upon us and the economy that's coming, that we're preparing those kids for, which is a different future than what we were being prepared for when we sat in those kids' seats. And microschooling is very popular. Obviously, we hear about the school choice states where microschools are able to use school choice programs, but they're thriving in blue and purple states that are not going to see those anytime soon. They do very well at the more fragile ends of the income spectrum. They do very well with families where a child has neurodiversities or confronting special needs in different areas. It's a very diversified movement, which makes it fascinating, I think.
Yeah, and you talked about preparing students for tomorrow. And look, I grew up with the beginning of the birth of the computer, and here we are. You fast forward to today, artificial intelligence. I mean, today's students probably will be competing in some way, or at least leveraging this AI in the workforce or wherever they choose to ultimately have a vocation.
It works in lots of ways. It's a style of learning. It's a much more active learner paradigm. Parents and families are much more active partners in their child's learning trajectories. Kids' decisions matter when they come in the course of a day. Microschools are all different. Some of them look rather traditional. Some of them are very innovative. They're truly child-centered learning models. Microschooling is about creating ways of learning that are just mostly not available under other options, right? That are just maybe not even possible because, even many states have such regulations on their private schools that you really couldn't have a small, truly child-centered learning environment, or some of the models that we're seeing, or some of the part-time hybrid models that are increasingly popular. And that happens often when microschools are like learning centers that are serving kids that are following the homeschool rules in their states. So what microschools are making available to families are just a range of learning environments that just aren't around any other way. And it's fascinating to watch how this movement evolves.
Yeah. Well, Don, I need to take a very quick break. We come back, how you can find and enroll your child in a micro school near you. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the first lifestyle and wellness network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device. Well, Don, thanks so much for staying with us. Really appreciate you hanging around for segment number 2 this morning.
Thanks. I love being able to talk to new audiences, and these are great questions. Thanks.
Yeah. So how do you benchmark? One of the things that you often hear is comparing how students do, and you read the press probably as much as I do, comparing how students do in school relative to their peers, both in state and out of state. How do you benchmark a micro school child's results against, for example, a public school or I'll call it a traditional school?
That's a great question, right? We're conditioned by the public school accountability frameworks that have been part of our learning systems since really No Child Left Behind, and sometimes even sooner in some states. And we're conditioned to think that how the kid does on the annual state test is the most important thing to measure impact. And measuring impact is certainly important. Microschools need to show their impact to their most important stakeholders, who are in most cases their families, but sometimes they're the foundations and other stakeholders. Microschools just need to show that they are adding value. So they can do that in lots of ways. And because microschools are led by such an impactful group of really innovative and really experienced and talented educators, they do this in different ways that are pertinent to their missions. As a longtime education researcher myself, I'm not especially bullish on the future of public school accountability systems in this country, right? There are just so many problems with that system, and it's not getting any better. Microschools can measure their impact in lots of ways. The microschool our first microschool that we led, which is a public-private partnership with a city in a highly underperforming school district serving a lot of lower-income families, was able to demonstrate that our kids in the microschool that we had, it was just over 100 kids, were gaining close to 2 years of academic growth in reading and in about the same ballpark, a little bit less in math, in one academic school year. And this was during the height of the pandemic shutdowns. And we were able to do that using the assessments embedded in the learning tools that we were using. And we also did a lot of other impactful things that showed parents in ways that mattered to those parents how their kids were doing and what the value added of the microschool was. And we found that we were able to keep our families a lot better informed and a lot more actively involved in the important decisions that mattered in their child's education, because the education that we provided was much more individualized than they were able to receive in the large school district systems that they were coming from. So our microschool was one example of the ways that microschools are showing their impact in ways that a lot of these families find just more insightful and more useful than the ways that their public schools are showing their impact.
And Don, if someone's watching this and they're hearing about a micro school for the first time, how do you find a micro school near you? If you're particularly if you're in a state that maybe doesn't allow for school choice, or maybe has some limits on where a child can go, how do you find that micro school?
So microschools are still in the early adoption phase, right? So there are some places where we have particularly robust movements, like South Florida, where the Florida Microschooling Organization locally has a great free directory. It's online, any parent can find it. But most families are not so lucky as to be in a place where they can do that. We're still in the early adoption phase. Microschools are at about a 2% market share nationally, and it's bigger in some areas than others. So we're the microschooling center, and we love hearing from families and people that might be interested in starting their own microschools. Microschoolingcenter.org is our website, and reach out to us. We don't publish online directories for a number of reasons, largely because we are relatively new, and a lot of the microschools are operating in frameworks and regulatory environments where they hadn't really anticipated microschools. So we actively work with regulators and decision makers to help them modernize and update their regulatory ways of doing things so that microschools can fit in and make sense. But because of that, we don't publish online directories, but we love taking calls from families. We're more than happy to We are always more than happy to point families in the right direction, or let families know. Most of the time, there just aren't a lot of microschools within any given community, because microschooling is still relatively new right now. So we can connect people, and if there's 5 families within your area that might be interested in starting something. And microschools are generally started by experienced educators who are licensed or recently licensed professional teachers in their own communities. So we love bringing people together, and we're a nonprofit that is foundation funded. So the work we do is for free. We love helping people start microschools and give them the training and the background and the tools they need to do it and do it well.
You mentioned, Don, and this is my last question, that right now it's a smaller market share relative to its traditional peers. What's it going to take to, as the trend continues to develop, people want to look at new ways to educate their children, both because of, probably most likely because of need? What's the trend look like in the next 5 to 10 years? How big do you think this movement gets? And will we see micro schools in all 50 states in the District of Columbia?
So microschooling is still a relatively small market share. We're about a 2% market share, which is about where Catholic schools are in this country. But the growth patterns that we're seeing are all across the country. They're totally diversified, families from every background, left, right, center. The models we're seeing are so diversified, and the backgrounds of the leaders of the microschools are that we are really bullish on the growth of the sector, and that a 10% market share in the near term, the next handful of years, is absolutely within a range of reason, I think, and the growth that we're seeing for any other of their, nothing meaningful in education happens in a vacuum, and for a variety of reasons in the broader ecosystem and the way the economy is going, right? The economy that's the future, the gig economy that's coming upon us, is not the kind of place that the traditional sort of factory model, one size fits all way of doing schooling in buildings that are 49 years old and cost $40 million to build and repay taxpayers with bond issues that are paid back over 20 years. That's just not the way that schooling has to happen, that's going to best equip our kids for the future. And for all of those reasons, we're really bullish that we could see the market share of microschooling really continuing to grow far past the 2% that it is now.
Well, Don, very interesting, very great to meet you. And thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to having you back on the program very soon, and we'll check in with your progress.
Great to talk. I look forward to it.
That wraps up this episode of BRNAM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news in lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to search our archives, check out our latest content? Well, then visit our website. Hey, we're back again tomorrow with BRN Weekly. Jane King will be here joining us from the NASDAQ to help break down markets and make sense of the economy. And then we'll be taking a look back at some of our best segments for the week. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving. Don't forget, roll with the changes.